hovering over the go, and then for some reason my finger just clicked because I saw it was 9 o'clock. Jeff, I apologize, brother. You were right in the middle of a sentence. Welcome to Data Day Wednesday, everybody. Here we are back with the master, Dean Cook, and our special guest every 2 weeks, Jeff Dickinson. So, y'all, we're going to talk about what's popping this week, and there's some pretty interesting data that Dean's going to share because I'm sure, like all of us, y'all are excited to hear about what kind of congestion backlog has been cleared in Shanghai and what it means to us coming soon.
Yes, coming on.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
Man,
Richard by far takes it this morning.
Yes, Richard got his first time up there.
Yeah.
I know he has been. He probably booby trapped. He figured out some
IP address for someone else and blocked everybody's IP and got in.
He wanted it. He wanted it this time, guys. Good morning, Richard.
So, good morning, everybody.
Yeah, morning.
Oh, Wednesday is here. Data Day, one of my favorite days ever in the week. And you know, Dean. So, Dean, you like that little video intro we got for Lane of the Day? Thank you very much for supplying those for the last couple of days here.
Thank you.
Good morning, John. Good morning, brother. So, Dean, the question that everyone's been waiting to get answered is: last week we talked about a specific number of vessels in Shanghai. Where are we at this week? And if you can just quickly recap last week for those that might have missed the show.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the 1st of June that Shanghai reopened, right? So we know that a lot of the vessels that would have normally gone to Shanghai went next door to Ningbo, where the restrictions weren't as severe in the regional lockdown of truckers getting in and out of the ports with the freight. So when we looked at the number of vessels sitting there waiting, it's well over 400 still. I think Vessel Value put a number out this morning or yesterday on Twitter saying that they're down to about 30 hours wait time from 69 at the peak of the lockdown in April. So it appears that congestion's easing and the fluidity is coming back into that particular port region. Piers data came out Monday, which is the import-export data for the US. Imports were up. In Los Angeles, up 11% in the last month, up 14% in Long Beach. So there's some volume coming back on the Trans-Pacific trade lane, which is fairly important. It's I can't remember the exact number, something like 30 to 35% of volume, I think, but about half of that comes from China. So nationally, volumes were up 3% in all ports in May. So that's the TEU volume, 20-foot equivalent unit. And up 6% year over year, which I think is an important number. So it says we're bringing in more containers. Last year, Jeff, you'll notice that we had the pull forward of, back to school and holiday season inventories happened earlier last year. Yep. So we saw the pickup in vessel congestion start around mid-June. Mm-hmm. And we're right now, vessel congestion off Long Beach is about 25. And remember, 25 is low compared to the 109 in January. Yep. But we're only a couple of vessels lower than this time last year. When you look at, so the number of vessels waiting at anchor off Los Angeles went way down to June and then took off again. What's getting hidden in the numbers, we need to make sure everyone's clear, is that I'm no longer seeing the smaller one-way charter TEU vessels, 800, 1,000 TEU. So a lot of carriers and 3PLs and firms hired their own vessels to do a one-way charter to bring in their own customer freight last year. When I looked at the number of vessels waiting off anchor this morning and the size of them, they weren't there, right? So the average size is up to about 8,700 TEU, whereas this time last year it was closer to 6,500 because the smaller vessels are dragging the average down. So I suspect because the volume's down, people aren't as much concerned about having things not on shelves for retail season, so they've stopped that one-way charter deal. So that's one thing you've got to be careful when you look at the number of vessels waiting at anchor. Remember, last year was sort of an outlier because there were a lot of smaller vessels in that total number. So we're not seeing that now. But clearly the ports have got in a much better position to increase the import surge that everybody's expecting. Well, almost everybody's expecting. Of course, Target came out yesterday and said they're thinking about cancelling some orders because they've got an excess of inventory. That could be the next big thing that we've got to watch.
Next big sales and push to get rid of inventory.
But
there's something that you just said there,
inventory,
Dean. What's that? Sorry.
Well, they've got different inventory in their stores, right? So they've got too much leisure wear for people wearing pajamas working from home, as opposed to people going out to conferences and events.
Work from home, Dean. Yeah, I know. You don't want to see the camera below. It's all good.
So it's just they've got a different mix of inventory, and we, just like last year, the lockdown was hard, but the reopening was even harder for most people. And I think that's what we're seeing now, is that the reopening has caught some of the inventory mix, caught them by surprise. So
you brought up a very valid point in that overview, Dean. And Jeff, I'm going to put it to you, because for all of you watching and listening, where you get your data is actually more important than the data you get. Jeff was sharing a story. Dean just shared with you the amount of TEUs that are up. That's the volume, the equivalent up in the market. And Jeff read a report, and Jeff, I'll let you take it away, because the report you read had actually said that volumes were down drastically year over year and month over month. Yep. But that's not factual. So just be very careful. Like when I was on marine traffic data this morning, I opened it up and I saw 2,044 vessels in Shanghai, and I went, holy crap. And I immediately, and here's the big thing, I immediately sent the link to Dean and said, is this accurate? So now let me be very clear. I'm not saying all of you send links to Dean.
I was just gonna say.
I apologize.
You said that I'm really mad. Like now everybody's gonna say, "Hold on, Dean, is this real?"
I apologize, Dean. I've set you up a couple of times, and I'm sorry, brother.
6:30 Eastern, just to be clear.
I should have done it.
Yeah. It was 6:30 Eastern. But you were up, brother. So what I'm saying is verify the data. Jeff, can you share what
I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus. I don't like putting people in those type of positions. But what I read was quite the opposite from what Dean just said, where TEUs dropped by a negative 24% in the past 30 days, down over 40% year over year.
So when you look at that swing that Dean just talked about, that's almost over 50% swing.
Yeah, that's insane.
Dean, did you not say it was up 11% year over year?
Yeah, that's across the entire country, it's up 6% year over year. But in Houston, I think where Jeff's talking about, it's up 24% year over year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those numbers are huge. And when you look at the volume of containers coming in, that, down 44% plus the 6, so that's 50%. That's a crazy number of containers if you were to take annual volume, right? Like that's just insane. So that was just a quick side note for y'all. Just be careful of where you get your data. Like if you want the straight up real data, follow Dean's show on Tuesday, follow that, because they deliver the straight goods. And be very careful where you get your data. And if you get it from a source, check that source before you share it. Because we were talking about before we went on air that imagine if you shared that article, that conversation that Jeff was talking about with a customer, and then the customer does some quick research and realizes you're so far off the mark. Like that strategy of I'm going to be the resource for my customer has just turned into OMG, you look horrible. Like you have no idea what you're talking about, right? So I want to stress it again to be very careful. So,
yes.
All right, Dean, what's popping in the world of logistics this week, brother?
Yeah, a couple of stories that I've seen emerge this week. Journal of Commerce had a really good story out on last week, I think it was, about West Coast port congestion. And it piqued my interest because I thought, oh, surely they're not talking about vessel congestion, because they've got very good at, I think, getting more vessels through the ports. Even though there's still 25 vessels waiting at anchor, they seem to have gotten better. Maybe that's because they've leased more space to handle more of the physical volume. But the story was really talking about container chassis and dwell times, so rail dwell times. And the inference was that container dwell times in LA Long Beach area are up to about 9.6 days. And that's about what they said was it's about 3 times what they need for normal port fluidity. And dwell time is, I think, what they're determining as the amount of time that containers spend getting unloaded and reloaded, I guess, in terms of those street changes that they do. But the article was talking, and it said that we're still trying to get shippers to unload the containers. So anyway, the story was that, and it turned out that that's exactly what's happening. Whenever we see, and the other part of the story was that the rail side of the network is having issues trying to get capacity in place also. So there was two things happening. Chassis shortages have been a problem for a long time, but the railroads are having trouble trying to get the equipment in place and get the capacity. So whenever I see that, I immediately think, oh, that means we'll see a repeat of last year, where eventually that surge volume, whenever you see your sort of the bulk of your capacity struggling, it means that the surge volume will flip over to the truckload spot market eventually. And it looks like it's happening now. And I'll share with you a couple of data points that kind of support what we're seeing, because I look at the Long Beach and Los Angeles volumes are up 11% and 14% month over month. There's more volume coming back to that Transpac trade lane. But one of the benchmark lanes that I look at where truckload competes very heavily with intermodal is Los Angeles, Chicago. And just last week, spot rates reversed their 6-month slide, but only increased a penny per mile to $1.65 line haul. And why that's important is that's still 89 cents a mile lower than this time last year. So rates are really, really low. And if you think about if you're a shipper and you've got really low truckload rates and you've got port congestion and intermodal capacity issues, truckload's a good alternative. And that's and we saw the same last year. Rates were much higher last year because there were much higher volumes. But it looks like, and I'll pardon the pun, the tide has turned in terms of the West Coast freight market softening. Now, I went one step further because the article said that they were still having a lot of ramp issues inland. So whenever I hear that, I immediately think, I think it's BNSF in Kansas City. They've got a big intermodal hub. I think it's BNSF. Chicago is a big hub for all the Class 1 railroads. A lot of that volume comes to Worcester, just near where I am, and then gets trucked all over New England. Joliet, Illinois is a massive market for intermodal trains coming in, and that volume then going into the dray market. So I had to look at those three markets because there's always a correlation between capacity issues in intermodal hubs and truckloads. So Joliet, Illinois, spot rates are up penny per mile after dropping for the previous 4 weeks. Chicago to the northeast hub of Worcester, up 11 cents per mile after decreasing for the prior 5 months. Right. Outbound spot rates Midwest, Kansas City to I think it was Lakeland increased for the 3rd week in a row. So it looks like that trend that we saw, where import volumes were, not affecting the truckload market has reversed. And why that's important, I think, for our listeners and viewers is we're only just at the start of the peak import season. Now, the caveat there is we don't know whether all of the blanked sailings in Asia will come back into capacity. Jeff can probably answer this better than I can. But a lot of the alliances cancelled up to 40% of their scheduled sailings between week 17 and week 23. So they actually pull those ships out of the circuit. That reduces capacity. And I think it's a chicken or the egg question. What came first? Is there less volume coming out of Asia because there were fewer ships? Or is there, are there fewer ships because they're seeing less demand? So that's what I don't know is, when they blank a sailing, that's because there isn't the capacity there, or sometimes the big alliances blank sailings to control price. So they pull the capacity out of the market to maintain their margins. What I don't know is that are they not seeing the volume surge build up coming back to the US, or is it just there were no ships to put the containers on because they blanked the sailings and parked the vessel? So that's an open question that we've got to watch. But it looks like things are getting back to normal in Shanghai. Things are starting to move again, and we're just at the start of that peak season shipping trend.
Now with things getting back to normal, things starting to move again, would it not be safe to say when it comes to even Houston, LB, LA, all these ports that were so congested a couple of months ago, are we not going to see the same thing happen? So, all these inbound lanes, truckload rates are going to start going up because they're going to be in higher demand. The rail is going to get even busier. Like all of these things I see kind of repeating itself from last year at a different level, because last year it was a consistent flow. Now we've had a zero flow for like Chinese New Year, now Shanghai being shut down and all this in such a short period of time.
Right.
Yeah. Is this not going to create like tidal wave that hits North America?
I think it's possible. I mean, one of the things that the JOC article said that lull in import volumes has allowed a lot of these ports to clear their backlogs. So
exactly. And if you look at like what it's been 37, 40 something days since Shanghai shipped a container out until the 1st of June. And LA is still backlogged, even at 29, but it's still backlogged. Like even with that like reprieve of 0 containers coming, or I shouldn't say 0, but way less containers coming in, there's still a backlog.
Well, there's still a shift of volume to the East Coast. So don't forget, East Coast import volumes are up 9% year over year, only up 1% on the West Coast. But there was a definite trend in the last month. I think it was really interesting. East Coast volumes only went up 1% in the last month, whereas West Coast volumes went up 9%. So, again, I'm not sure how to read into that because one month's a data point doesn't make a trend. But there's definitely been a trend to, as we were talking about with Jeff before the show, there's been a trend towards ports not called Los Angeles and Long Beach, right? And they've been handling a lot more of that volume. I don't know whether shippers will continue that trend. It's logical to think that they will, and we'll see a repeat of what we saw last year, which is more congestion, more port volumes at ports, smaller ports in other areas around the country.
Which will then create more OTR freight in those areas, rail congestion in those areas, and port congestion in those areas, right? And anyone that ships freight to or from those areas has to be careful, just like what we saw with a ton of people in the Texas area where, their rates going into Texas dropped by 30, 40, 50 cents a mile almost overnight.
Yeah, and something in regards to congestion, the other massive issue that the ports have right now, and I'm seeing it firsthand, is the appointment process. The appointment process for both in-gating and out-gating is outdated. It's mismanaged, to say the least. It's like when you go to a concert and you want to buy a ticket, right? You go to pay for a ticket and they go, it's sold out. So the problem that I have with that, and I'm sure that our viewers have that if they're doing any international business, is that they get the appointment, and when they go in there to either in-gate a container, out-gate one, we're not accepting anything anymore. So why didn't you tell us that in the beginning? Because it's such a waste of money on so many fronts. And then who pays for it? The shipper, the demurrage, the custom brokerage houses that have to pay that. When they went in and they were somewhat guaranteed an appointment, they go there at the appointed time and they're kicked away. I mean, it's totally unfair. And, I hate to say it, but you wonder why these steamship lines are posting billions of dollars quarterly in profits. I mean, they have to change the process. I mean, everybody out there has this problem. And when it gets to peak season, and now you combine that problem with the appointment process, we're in deep trouble. We're going to be in deep trouble. The intermodal, cross docks, warehouses, dray carriers, OTR. I mean, I could just keep on rolling them off. They're all going to be impacted somewhat.
I'm in a let's call it a heated conversation over an argument with a 4PL and a steamship line right now, because we had a container come in for a customer. Once it got released, it literally went right from the port to his door. He turned it around in 3 hours and sent it back, and there's 5 days to merge on the container. And I'm like, not a chance. I'm like, no, it sat at the port for 5 days ago. But again, why is that my problem? In the end, it is my customer's problem, because in the end, he will have to pay it. But I'm fighting because I don't believe that's fair. Like, if there's congestion in the ports, then figure it out between the steamship lines and the port to do it. Once you had the container and it outgated, it was like literally ready to go back within hours. Now, there was an issue because the dray carrier wasn't able to pick it up that day. It had to be the next day. There's there's all these different variables that go into it. But is it really the customer's fault?
It's not. It's not. And the other thing, too, is with these dray carriers, when they start charging you a fee called congestion port fees, You know, it's just like, if there's no congestion, everything's working fine, then why is there a congestion fee? You know, they want the containers, they want the chassis, but yet they won't allow you to return them or to take them out. You know, they send all these emails out. Last free day is on the for me, with this past Friday the 3rd, you know, and then it's like, if you don't get it out, you're going to get it demerged. So they're holding everybody hostage. You know, I mean, that's what they're doing. They're holding everybody hostage, yet they complain about containers and chassis shortage. It's just ridiculous.
I'm sure we could do like a 4-hour show just on that.
Oh gosh, yeah.
You could go on for hours.
You know, I've always said, I've always been curious, and Jeff, maybe you know this. How do dray carriers make money? Because I know I was doing thousands of containers a year, and I remember when we would go in with 10 trucks in one day, and these guys would sit there for 5-6 hours waiting for a container, especially in Montreal. And we're talking 5 years ago, and it would be $350. And I'm like, I would not sit anywhere for 4 hours for $350.
No.
Just wouldn't happen. Not, especially not with a tractor trailer, you know, chassis.
Yeah, no one you can be making money doing something else. Yeah.
I don't get it. And you know, and it's, to me, I say it's not fair, because again, how many times on this show have we said, Dean, you know, you've been very particular about it. Leave something for the next person in line. And at $350, how is that leaving any meat on the bone for the dray carrier?
Right.
Like, I don't see it. I don't see how they can make money. You know, like I don't know. And call me crazy, but, and I mean, obviously the rates have changed since then, but even then it was like, you know, you're $350, you're bringing from the Port of Montreal all the way up to the West Island. Or, you know, like that is, you know, an hour's drive kind of thing, an hour and a half drive, depending on, well, Montreal traffic, almost 2 hours sometimes, but you know, so you got 2 hours drive. So you're almost 4 hours plus 5 hours. You're like 9 hours for $350. How many people would work 9 hours for $350 in traffic, dealing with four-wheelers that are just jerks and idiots and people cutting me off left? Like, I mean, it's a recipe for going, you know, postal. But,
yes.
Yeah. Hey, I saw this is kind of tangentially related to it, but I was watching a TikTok post on a reefer carrier who's loading beef out of one of the biggest beef companies in the country. He said, "I'm loading hamburgers," and the inference was, I think he said, it was being cynical, but he said a lot of the delays he thinks are orchestrated to, you know, keep rates high or keep prices high. The price gouging piece is interesting, because I'm getting gouged by home builders trying to do renovations right now. Yeah. And the variance in quotes is just ridiculous. He said, and I watched his posts over the last 36 hours. He said, I am currently at 37 hours waiting to get this load of hamburgers. So
you mean he's waiting 37 hours on the dock?
Yeah, and you can see the videos and the timestamps of when he posted them. So remember last year we were talking about,
where was he at? You know, I'm only asking because so my furniture ladies, shout out to them, but they just had a container come in and it was waiting. I don't know how long, but it was waiting forever. They said
he's on a loading dock. He's not at a port. He's on a loading dock.
This was at a port. This was at the port in New York. Workers.
Yeah, no. He's an owner operator trying to load a 53-foot reefer, so it's not drop and hook. He's only got and so, but I said, okay, so that's an outlier, right? It's not an outlier, because since I don't quite know how to categorize what the actual problem is, but this is a really big problem when capacity loosens, because you're kind of beholden to the shipper once you're there. Like, where do you go? Where do you go when you're, you know, 80 miles off I-95 in Presque Isle, Maine, and you're loading frozen French fries? Where else do you go when you're there? So I think for a lot of these guys, they kind of, once they get there and they've got ELD issues, they kind of hope, the hope is always that you'll get loaded quickly, but the reality is it could take longer. And you get to this point where, do I just cut bait and run? You know, or do I just wait this out? And sometimes it takes a lot longer. So this issue of trucks getting held up at shippers is still going on. And the reason I mention it, this goes back to the JOC article about West Coast port congestion, because a lot of the chassis are being tied up, you know, at the shipper loading points or unloading points. So maybe it's because warehouses are over full. They're just too full and they can't handle the capacity. I don't know what the answer to that is, but
they're kind of using the containers and trailers as outside storage kind of thing.
That's
and you know,
that's going on a lot. You can see that here in Ohio all over the place.
Yeah, and the thing is here, it's a operational failure logistically when you think about it, and the way that they communicate with their carriers. I mean, if you're a carrier, would you rather have the truth and say, hey, listen, you know, we used to be at an hour and a half, but right now the average is about 4 to 5 hours for getting loaded. You know, do you think you're going to build that relationship or destroy it if you go in there and you say it's an hour and a half and you'll be in and out in a jiffy and you're there for 5 hours? I mean, the way that I look at it is, you know, the carrier should charge detention fees and make that absolutely, you know, firm that I'll give you 2 hours free time at the, you know, at the door. Everything after that, $75 to $100. You want to see how fast that they do it when the capacity isn't there? They'll load them up real quick.
You know, Jeff, I agree. The challenge is always going to be there's somebody that will sit for free. They're always, and I don't understand it, but there's always somebody that will take that load. And I think it's, you know, you really wish a lot of shippers have learned, like, and don't get me wrong, right? There's been a lot of conversations about people retooling. You know, if you look at the statistics, when schools were opening and closing and like that, a lot of dual income families, one, either the husband or wife or whoever it is, one of the spouses took leave or did something to stay home because schools are open, then they're closed, and they're open, then they're closed. It was like, I couldn't even imagine having children in, like, you know, primary or secondary school when these things are closing. Maybe not secondary school because you don't necessarily need to be home, but primary school.
Right.
But now it's like, if and just take this one for example, if you need 36 hours to load a truck, figure out a trail pool situation, because 36 hours to load a truck is disgusting. It's showing you that you have no respect for that person's time and the effects that it's going to have on that person. I guarantee you they're not paying him $1,500, $2,000 a day that he can make rolling with a reefer minimum. They're not paying him that because, you know, he's there 36 hours right now. He's up, you know, $5,000 almost in detention charges plus the line haul rate. There's not a company on earth that would pay that. But
unless it's you know, a drop and hook operation. Unless it's a drop and hook operation, you know, then it's justifiable. If they can tie up assets for a period of time and they have a plethora of trailers, then why not? But if you're going to have your guys sit there, you know, and like Dean was saying, the ELDs, I mean, he's on the clock for a while, you know, I mean, he's getting tied up, he's losing money left and right. I mean, it's not fair for the drivers. You know, you just got to be honest. You know, if you're talking to these carriers, you have to be honest with them. That's the only way you're going to build a long-term business relationship with them. Find out what their needs are, let them find out what the shipper's needs are, and then come to a mutual conclusion and saying, hey, this is what's going to work best for both of us. Move on.
Like, how many of you have had a meeting scheduled and you show up on time and you sit in the waiting room for 30 minutes? How does that make you feel? Right? How many of you have had that happen to you? And it's the same thing when we do it to a driver. It's like, I don't know how many times I've sat in doctors' offices or at prospects' offices. And it's like, I'm looking, I'm like, listen, we had a meeting 30 minutes ago. And I've gone up to the receptionist and said, listen, like, I had a meeting 30 minutes ago. Is this going to happen or not? Because with all due respect, like, my time's worth something as well. And I'm sorry if I sound like a jerk, but to just leave me sitting here is ignorant. And it kind of makes me feel like I don't even want to do business with you. Right. You know, and I've had that conversations with receptionists, because if this is the way I'm going to be treated, you know, like when there's nothing on the line, it's imagine if now I'm going back to the customer for demerge or detention, or when there's a problem that maybe is their fault. How they're going to be like zero dark 30, man. They're off in the
radio silence,
somewhere. Radio silence, right? So do I really want to get into that relationship if this is the way it starts? And this is the problem. You know, hamburgers, it's grilling season. I got a freezer full of hamburgers right now because I'm like, that's what it is. But again, 36 hours. That's and at what point, Dean, to your point where you said, do you cut and run? There's a lot of wasted money at this point.
Yeah.
And if you cut and run, they're going to be like, well,
gas. I mean, gas is not going down. So
right. Exactly. When you think about cutting and running, right? what's the Deadhead miles before you get to your next load, right? You get all the way up until the middle of the woods, like Dean was saying, 80 miles out. Now you've got to go another 80 miles out of there because you're just done with that ship. You'll never do business with them again. Look how much fuel, look how much money you just lost. Waiting time, fuel, time. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, this is where it affects the smaller carriers, right, that run a one-to-one ratio between trailers and trucks. The big fleets with trailer pools have probably got better utilization levels because they can preload. But it's still an issue, though, just in terms of general efficiency. And I think there may be something still to this where shippers, our shippers and receivers are still struggling with labor. They may, it's, and I don't know what the numbers are as of today, but it's certainly, we just had an all-time record number of transportation employees in May. It eclipsed the record of number of employees added in a month going back to April, I think it was 2019. So we've got a record number of people working in the transportation industry. I don't know how that pans out on the other side of the dock, but there's an inefficiency level that I can't figure out. And part of me, I get a little bit skeptical when I hear my builder say, what I used to pay $3 for a 2x4, I'm now paying $15 for. And I heard a guy yesterday, a very prominent person on social media, say that there's a shortage of motor oil for diesel engines because the additives that are required, the additive mix comes from two companies. I think it was Liposol and Chevron in Houston. And he said they're out and you can't buy 15W40 Shell Rotella oil. Well, I went straight onto Amazon and ordered a 5-gallon pail of 15W40 Shell Rotella oil. It'll be here tomorrow. So what I can't figure out is so a lot of people are talking about this, and a lot of us could say, yeah, I can still believe that because we've been used to it for a year. But how long do you spin that narrative before it's no longer holds water? And I just don't know. I feel like that's what's going on with some parts of the supply chain. That there is clearly price gouging going on. There's no question when I go to buy stuff from my truck, there's absolute price gouging going on, because just with that example, people are talking about shortages on one end of the spectrum, yet I can buy it online immediately. So there's a lot of misinformation out there for sure. And I just don't know how this pans out for us in the trucking industry. Carriers are certainly hurting at the moment with these high diesel prices up again this week. These are tough times for sure.
Yeah, you know what? Hey, Dan, tell them about the story about your 2x4 when you were building and you thought it was a deal. Remember you said that last week or something like that?
It's so I went into a hardware store last week and I was asking them about 2x4s because I'm building out the bar in my pool area. And I'm like, and I'm it's under a roof. So I'm going, do I need treated wood? Do I need untreated wood? And it ended up being that treated wood was $12 a 2x4 and untreated was like 16. And I went, what? He goes, yeah, that's weird. I go, I'll take 10. And I just right away, I'm like, give me that number, write it down in the SKU on the piece of paper. Let's go. And I went and got usually lumber that's double the other one. So somehow it was mixed. I'm like, yeah, I'll take as much as I need. I overbought because it's crazy. I had a friend of mine who was building a house and he went in 2 weeks ago to get a 12-foot 2x4 and it was like $18. He went in last week. It was 27. Like the same 2x4 and 27. He goes, I was just here last week. They go, yeah, it just went up. It's like, oh my God, are you guys kidding me right now? Like but it's everywhere. It's beyond frustrating because and I couldn't even imagine, we've had Greg on, we've had John Brewer on, shippers are going, how do you budget? Like when we ask Greg, so he goes, guys, I don't know. I how do I budget? Companies are coming out and saying, okay, we need a freight budget for this year. And they're going, yeah, good luck with that, but that brings us to what Dean, yes, definitely. Let's talk about spot rates and produce season and how it's impacted, because that's going to be part of the impact. That's going to drive prices up, down, and everything in between for sure.
Yeah. We talked about on our show yesterday, because normally you see an upward inflection in spot rates that peaks around July 4 for both dry van and reefer. That's certainly been the historical trend. The delta is somewhere like 20 to 30 cents a mile from April till June, July 4. right, in terms of how much they go up. So produce season normally delivers. You've got grilling season, Memorial Day, Labor Day coming. Labor Day is going to be further out. Memorial Day, Independence Day, I meant. So you've got a lot of seasonal activity that normally pushes growers to get produce into markets. We certainly consume more, but it's just not delivering this year. Remember on our show a few weeks ago, we talked about, produce was off to one of its coolest starts since 2017. That's still holding, even though we've got some citrus volumes in from California. And this could be a longer season. So we may see volumes sort of go longer than July 4, but normally things quieten right off after July 4 when everyone's on vacation. So what the numbers look like right at the moment, this is important. We've only got 4 weeks to go until July 4 to see the normal material increase in spot rates that we normally do. So first part is rates of the slide that we've seen for the first 5 months has been halted. So spot rates have flattened out and trending up a little bit in dry van, not so much in reefer. Reefer's still looking like they want to go down more. Flatbed's holding its own and going up. So flatbed's very different for lots of reasons. So I looked at USDA data for meat, dairy, poultry, anything that requires refrigeration. The volume, the tonnage that's in cold stores as at the end of May was down 13% year to date compared to all of the previous years. So we've got less refrigerated volume moving. And I don't like to compare to last year because last year was such an abnormal year. So we've got fewer tonnage. In truckload volumes, the amount of volume that's sort of non-fruit and veg is down 1,600 truckloads a week. So it's not a huge number, but it's not going up. It's actually going down. Then I looked at the produce numbers because what I was trying to figure out is where's the demand going to come from with all this capacity to push spot rates up. So in the week immediately after Memorial Day, produce volumes typically drop because there's a surge to get the volume into the markets. We all party, have the weekend off, then volumes drop I think it was last week they dropped. They normally drop, the average decrease is about 6% or 10,000 fewer loads in that week after, right? Last week, the drop was 9% or 15,000 loads. So we had a steeper drop off last week. So national volumes are down 18% year over year. It means that we're moving about 32,000 fewer truckloads last week than the same week last year. So 31, that's a lot of truckloads. Now, what the biggest part of that is 21,000 of those are from California, fewer loads out of the West Coast. About 1,200 fewer loads out of the Southeast, where produce season's well and truly underway. So we're just seeing less volume in the market compared to year over year. So what I did is I looked at this period from 1st of March to 4th of July, when demand normally sort of, I won't say surges, but produce volumes increase significantly and it drives rates up. So if June is the equivalent to the average of the last 6 Junes, then truckload produce volumes, this is the weekly number of truckloads in that period from March 1st to July 4, will only have increased 1%. The average in that previous years is 12%.
Wow.
So you normally see a 12% increase in the volume of weekly truckloads, 3.1 to 7.4. Even if I'm generous and look at June numbers and say, I'll add a little bit more in there, at most it's like a 2% increase over that period of time. So that's why we've been saying for a while is that we just don't see spot rates having that material increase this season that we normally do because the demand just isn't there for lots of different reasons. So we've been talking about spot rates. I think I use the words they'll kind of bounce around right through, for the most part of this year. That's certainly what it looks like. And I think the interesting thing, I'd love to get your perspective on this, Jeff, but spot rates are holding at about 2018 levels. When you look at dry van and reefer, very, very similar data points. This year, even in flatbed, looks a lot like 2018 did from a demand and capacity perspective. So, but as I said on our show yesterday, it's really interesting to me that this new floor in terms of price that we've been talking about because of higher inflation, higher wages, higher operating costs, the floor price in dry van is holding at about what it costs to run a truck at about $2.05 a mile. So I'm kind of, maybe this is just a wild coincidence, but to me, it's interesting that spot rates are bottomed out around what it costs you to run a truck and trailer in a small fleet.
kind of like a conspiracy theory.
Well, maybe they're holding. Maybe that's the new floor price, right? Because you can't take driver pay away.
Could be.
Well, I'll share one thing with you, and I don't know if it has, which I think it's somewhat interconnected. So part of what I was noticing, and I actually posted about it a couple of days ago or yesterday on LinkedIn, is I've had more out of office replies, more out of office emails, more out of office voicemails in the last week and a half than I've had since COVID started, obviously. I think also what's happening is with things start opening up, people's vacation patterns, at least for this year, have completely changed. Right. More people are, instead of that, kind of 4th of July on kind of taking off where, typically July and August in logistics sales are two of the slowest months. Like if you haven't, it's kind of like the Christmas season. If you haven't closed the deal before July, you're very likely not going to close it till September. Right. Because it's like vacation and then they get back and then other people from their department leave and they get back. And it's like, do we really want to take on this new supplier? We'll use the okay people for the next little bit. And then before the busy season hits. And I'm actually seeing it about a month early. And I'm actually recording all of it this week. And I'll be sharing on Monday on a post and maybe even Mayhem Monday. I'll share the results because it's actually to the point where, normally you make phone calls, you get an out of office, you kind of just keep moving. But it was to the point where it was very noticeable. Like, 7 out of 10
every single time
are out of office. Right. So it's interesting. Oh, so David asks a question here. He says, is there any validity to a possible DEF shortage as expressed by the CEO of Pilot Flying J back in April? And Dean, you said you have an answer to that?
Yeah, because as an owner operator with a Flying J fuel card, I actually get a lot of pretty good intel from the company. They share a fair bit of information. And an email came out yesterday, coincidentally, David. And I'll just quote you some of it. It said, national diesel inventories remain low, especially on the West Coast. They expect to see lots of volatility in diesel markets throughout the year, which I thought was a really interesting statement at the middle of the year. Any disruption, weather, we've already got tight capacity. Imagine if we have hurricane impact around Houston again. We may have more significant and longer impact due to current levels and market volatility. So what he's saying is any disruption this year is going to have a much bigger effect. To answer David's questions, we've had productive conversations with Union Pacific Railroad and will continue to use their rail services to supply DEF. How about that? Flying J doesn't anticipate retail runouts at any of our locations in the foreseeable future. Although yesterday I did see a post from another guy showing all the fuel islands blocked at a Pilot Flying J because they didn't have any diesel. So
wow.
That's because the person that wrote that email to you is up here and has no idea what's actually happening down here.
Kind of like the people making the rules for us right now.
there's some truth to it. I think David raised a really good point. There's clearly some truth to this, and there's some shortages going on, just like there's shortages of additives and all sorts of things in the supply chain.
Wow.
Yeah, there's huge. I mean, just even on the snowmobile front, they're talking about huge shortages of injector oil. A lot of different things. And it's a friend of mine is ordered a new sled, and he's already got emails back saying, hey, listen, we're having shortages of this and that, and dyes for the paints. I told you guys about a buddy of mine who's very high up at one of the largest paint companies on the planet. And he says, like, it's insane what's happening. And it's not just, it's parts that are needed or components or material that's needed to get things done. It's insane. It's insane what's going on.
Question, Jeff?
Yeah, Dean, two things. What's your take on the food shortage? I've been reading in the papers all the time, all these pictures of the shelves being empty, people trying. I know you were talking about hamburgers before and all of that, but it just seems like a lot of articles on this topic. And I just wanted to see what your take was on that.
Yeah, so my wife owns a catering business. They've got a high-end catering business here in Boston. We probably, run 3 vans got half a dozen employees and up to 40 people at any one event with casual staff. So it's a reasonably good benchmark for me of where that sector is. So record monthly volumes are triple what they were this time last year. Had to buy more fridges, had to buy another van this month just to keep up with demand, because we're seeing this pent-up demand for all sorts of events. So there's more demand right now. But to answer your question specifically, I don't see it at my retail supermarket down the road. I don't see anything that mirrors that. What they are seeing is outages at Restaurant Depot, where they normally would go to buy supplies. And instead of going to just Restaurant Depot, they've got to go to 4 locations to get the same inventory. And it's not just food, right? It's supplies, plastic spoons, napkins, all sorts of things. So there is something to it. At the retail side, I'm not seeing it, but at the wholesale side, there's definitely something going on there that's affecting the volumes. And I don't know whether it's a packaging problem. Like, people are still struggling to go back from, because there's a shift from delivering to the home, right? Mm-hmm. Online retail buying, which is a different product mix, different packaging mix, shifting back to, remember, a lot of these big manufacturers cut down a lot of their production lines to just deliver certain types of food type content, packaging. Yep. And now I think that some of them are probably struggling to retool and reopen up these other production lines to go back to where they were. That's what it appears like. So, baby formula coming from Australia.
Yeah. Well, and and it's also going out to more restaurants now. You're asking for things on the menu, and we don't quite have that yet. So it's like restaurants that tooled back their menu are now struggling to get that feedback. I can say I do the grocery shopping, and I'm about 1 or 2 items a grocery shop that I can't seem to find, or like we do the fiber 1 bar thing as opposed to like granola bars, like the dips and I'll go and I'll see like 2 boxes one time and I'll get both. Whereas normally I would never have to buy 2. You just kind of buy one, the next week you go buy another one. But the next week there'll be none. It'll be empty. And then the next week there'll be 3 or 4 boxes. Then the next week it'll be none. Then the next week there'll be like 12. So and I go, like, it's typically the same day every week that I go shopping. So what I'm finding is just like 1 or 2 items that aren't quite there. Like, for example, for the dog food I make the dogs, I want to get frozen chopped spinach. Sometimes I'll have to get whole leaf spinach and chop it myself because there's no frozen chopped spinach. But the next week it'll be back.
So it's a good point. We were talking about food shortages. I don't have kids, but of course there's a lot of people that have babies where they need baby formula. And Richard makes a good point. I read yesterday that one of the big factories are reopening. Abbott are going to restart their production, but it won't end the shortage fast enough. So there's definitely shortages going on with some things for sure.
So do we know why they stopped production?
I don't.
Because that would be interesting, because you would think if you look at, it'd be interesting to see the stat of how many babies are now being born because of COVID, because of everybody at home. You know what I mean? Almost like that baby boomer situation where it's, everyone came back from the war. It was like babies. And I just realized that reference. That's sorry. But, so you wonder if that's going to be a spike. And maybe we just weren't ready for it if it's a shortage because there's twice as many babies that were born. You know what I mean? I don't know I don't know that answer, but it fares that there's a data point that we might need to research here. So what else we got for today, boys?
Yeah.
Hey, Dean, you're talking about the flatbed industry and everything. But I'll tell you what, West Virginia is up there. I mean, take a look at your graphs, like 64 to 64.4 to 1. Yeah. I mean, it's red hot. I mean, we were talking about Texas and the oil fields last week, and I'm just amazed how much coming out of West Virginia. Tremendous.
Yeah, it's not a huge freight market in terms of volume, but really a strategic one. I'm just quickly pulling up some rates here to see. Yeah, this is interesting because a lot of volume, we talked about it on the show before. Canada is a huge export market for West Virginia. I think it's its largest export location. Flatbed rates from Huntington, Virginia to Toronto, excluding fuel, up to $3.45 today. That's $1.50 more than this time a year ago. So that's just flatbed. So capacity is still tight on that lane. And I'll quickly look at dry van just to see if similar story, up to $3.75 this week. That's up about $1.80 on this time last year. So lots of very tight capacity in that lane at the moment.
Yep.
Interesting.
There's a few other good comments too. Mags said there's a recall, but then also Richard, you said allegedly. I actually seen the pallets. There was tons of pallets down there for all the illegals coming in.
So Maggie's saying there's a shortage because of recall. Babies got sick from what Trish is back to possibly their play. Got it. Okay, and then a ton was shipped to the southern border allegedly.
That's true.
Crazy. Yeah, definitely. That's actually interesting because that can happen fairly quick when there's a recall. I remember when there was a beef recall when it was like mad cow disease out in Alberta and all that, and down in Texas years ago. I mean, the beef just skyrocketed because there was tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cows that had to be slaughtered because they were just bad. So yeah, it happens definitely.
Crazy.
Yeah, same with the bird flu. When that farmer destroyed, I forgot how many millions of chickens. It was unbelievable. A couple weeks ago.
You wonder why, Walmart used to have 2 packs of chicken breasts for $20.
Yeah.
And it was like typically 5, the odd time you get a 6, but it was definitely 5 chicken breasts in a pack. And that was the go-to. Now you get 6 for $23. So, you go from 10 for 20 to 6 for 23. It's like, it's crazy. And it was because of, and again, you got those to replace it, they got to grow up. You know what I mean? Like there's things that need to happen. Crazy. But you know what? I think in the end, it's obviously going to be a retooling, and those that retool faster are the ones that are going to come out victorious. That's the way it is.
Yes.
It's just paying attention to the data.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just pulling some data while we were chatting there. It's interesting. Average outbound rates out of Virginia are up 37 cents in the last month. So capacity is really tightening for anything outbound from West Virginia. That's dry van. So dry van is up 37 cents in a month, which is interesting, right? Because rates have been dropping everywhere else.
Yeah.
But there are still some lanes where rates are actually doing the exact opposite. Reefer rates went up 30 cents. Now they're back 18 last week. And flatbed outbound line haul rate map for West Virginia is back to 3.77. So it's cool. No, it's up actually 3 cents this week. So yeah, very tight capacity in some regions. Again, data is very important. People have been hearing, rates have been dropping, but in some areas it's doing the exact opposite because of the imbalance of capacity,
which is very important for your customers to know.
Yes.
Yeah. Extremely.
Very important.
Yes.
All right, DJ, what do you got today, brother?
Yes, thank you guys. For joining us like you do. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us every other Wednesday like you are now. Great to have you on here with us. Dean, as always, thank you so much for all of your amazing information.
Yes, thank you, both of you.
It really helps. Guys, follow the data. It's, this is
good data. Good data.
Good data.
You can either be blind trying to find your way to your target, or follow some checkpoints and some data and figure it out, or at least stay in the lines. But you got to follow the data. But again, thank you everybody for joining us weekly and daily right here, Sales Chatter Live, 9 a.m. to 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. Again, our show for our Wednesday Triple D days, so that's why we are going an hour today. Tomorrow we got a great guest, don't miss out. And then obviously Fridays wins and lessons. I think we'll have Mark on, right? And maybe
I think Mark's back from Portugal. He was golfing last week, so he should be back.
Join us. She did,
and I'm sure he's going to have some kind of new hat that he's going to share with us. So it'd be cool.
Oh, great! Yes, even better. Now I'm excited. And to throw Daman up there, and thank you to Centurion Trucking and American Logistics, and thank you for joining us like you do every day, Daman, and making this possible. So seriously, thank you for what you do.
Thanks.
Again, thank you everybody. Great quote, I think, to take us out. This came from I don't even know where it came from, so it doesn't have anybody, but I love it. Data is like water: neglect its quality and fear the indigestion.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Daman, stick around. This one's for you, my friend.
Centurion Trucking, our motto is people before profit. Today's market requires more transparency, consistency, and focus on what our clients need to win. Centurion Trucking and American Logistics are poised to help their clients achieve and surpass their targets. If you're looking for a team that honors your needs, dreams, and aspirations, then get a hold of Daman at American Logistics or Centurion Trucking and start designing your